You're watching the free version of SynthEyes Essentials. For projects and footage, head to BorisFX.com for the premium download. Hello and welcome back to SynthEyes Essentials. The last class was filled to the brim with all this information about lens distortion and why it is so important to consider it when solving a shot in SynthEyes. Well, now is the time to put this knowledge to good use. Let's start things off with this shot of a kitchen. It'll work really well as an example because we've got a lot of straight lines in the image. This was once again shot on a Canon R5, so our sensor width is 36mm and the frame rate is 29.97 frames per second. For starters, let's set the maximum tracker count to 500, clip all the frames and peel all trackers. Let's do our initial solve without letting SynthEyes calculate the distortion. The error is slightly above 3, but the camera track looks sensible. Before we continue, let's head over to the lens room. We do see a lens grid overlay, but as expected, it is totally undistorted at the moment. The lens grid will give us a great indication of what is happening in the scene, but I want to have some additional guidance, so we will draw up some lines. Now I want to draw these lines along elements in the image that we know to be straight. Go to frame 196 and click and hold the middle mouse button to move your image so that you can see the line here at the front of the fridge. Select Add Line and click and drag your mouse to draw a line. Once you finish the line, choose Not Orientated. Now we are going to repeat this process for a couple of lines. Notice that not every line will follow the real-world line in the footage exactly. There are small curvatures in the middle. This is why you need to be extra careful to place the tips in the correct place. If, for example, you are starting your line just at the very bottom edge of a tile, then place the end on a bottom edge of a tile as well. The idea is really to find lines we know to be straight, so be careful to avoid lines that just look straight, but in reality are not, like down here at the cupboard. If you look really closely, the drawer is a bit more tucked in than the door below, so don't consider this to be a single line. As I said, these are just little helper lines. They are not there to perform any active part in solving the distortion, but they will help us visualize what is going on. Let's click the checkbox for Calculate Distortion and switch to the solver room. Or switch to the solver room and then click the checkbox for Calculate Distortion. By now you might have realized that some commonly used elements are placed in multiple rooms. So whether you click that checkbox in the lens or in the solver room, it basically performs the same function. I'm not going to clean up the trackers yet because I want us to be able to observe how each step influences the lens distortion. So with just the distortion calculation switched on, I'm going to refine the scene. The error drop is rather low, but take a look at our top, front and left view. I will switch between before and after the refine a couple of times by undoing and redoing. Do you see how the point cloud kind of straightens itself out, becoming less curvy? Now let's switch over to the lens room. Our image is unchanged, but take a look at the lens grid and the lines. They are now being distorted according to the factor that SynthEyes calculated, and we can see that the lines are already sticking closer to their real-world counterparts. You can see that when I redo again between before and after the refine. To calculate this kind of lens distortion, SynthEyes needs quite a lot of trackers, so this is ideal for feature tracking or for shots where you've got a good surplus of supervised trackers. But still, refinement will have an influence on your distortion if you keep Calculate Distortion checked. Let me show you. Call up the Cleanup Trackers dialog and apply the default settings. Then refine again and take a look in the lens room. That distortion is now substantially higher. You can see that if we once more redo a couple of times. So this is really important to understand. If you refine your track time and again with Calculate Distortion checked, the distortion will be refined continuously as well. Also, pay close attention to the distortion value here. If we want to learn what this is all about, let's click on the More button. What we are presented with are the advanced lens controls, and the drop-down allows you to pick the lens distortion model that SynthEyes is using under the hood. The values here are called distortion coefficients, and the top one is the one that we also see here on the left-hand side. Right now you can see that we are only calculating the quadratic distortion. I don't want to turn this into a physics masterclass, so let's stick to the practicalities for this. Only select additional distortion coefficients if the coefficient you already have selected doesn't do the job. Don't fall for the more is better trap. But if you find that quadratic alone isn't giving you an accurate distortion, then select cubic as well and refine once more. And only continue adding distortion coefficients as long as you see an improvement. In our example, in which we are dealing with a typical barrel distortion, working with quadratic alone will do the job. While we are in the advanced lens controls, let's take a look at the different lens distortion models. Up until now, we were only looking at the classic lens distortion model, but as you can see, there are some more. Some are for specific lens types, like anamorphics or fisheyes. Those would definitely blow the scope of an Essentials course. But there are some that are interesting, not because they undistort that differently, but rather because of the way they allow data transfer to other applications. To give you a practical example, if I want to use the lens undistortion node in Flame, I need to use the standard radial 4th order, the standard anamorphic 6th order, or the standard merged 6th order for that to work. If and what kind of restrictions apply is something I would encourage you to test out for your specific workflow. And at the end of this course, we will have a proper walkthrough of the most common applications used in conjunction with SynthEyes. And there's always the option to export an ST map, a vector map that can convey the distortion data to virtually any application. That also is a topic for the end of this course, so stay tuned. Regardless, the models all work in a similar fashion. Start with just the top distortion coefficient and then slowly and deliberately work your way down if needed. Before we continue, let's quickly align our scene and bring in some geometry. To find out where the ground is, I'm quickly going to track the corner of those 4 tiles here. And this is the perfect opportunity to introduce you to a new tracking mode, corners. Similar to the black and white spot modes before, this will work really well if placed on corners, and boy will that be helpful when we get to lens grids. But this tracker sits in there nicely and now I can orientate my scene. Next up, I'm going to place a teapot in here, kind of fitting to put this staple of CG history in its natural habitat. Now with that geo, let's return to the lens room. We already discussed that the graphics SynthEyes puts over the footage are distorted. We observed that the grid and the lines were distorted according to this distortion value. But just to prove a point, let's call up the advanced workflow and just remove the distortion. And suddenly, all our graphics, including our geometry, are undistorted. And of course, if we reapply the distortion, all the geometry gets properly redistorted as well. This is really important because most other CG applications don't show you distorted geometry. And this finally brings us to this button, the lens workflow. I already alluded to this at the end of the last class. If we open up that menu, we see 3 major options: undistorted 1, redistorted 2, and undo earlier run. Just to recap, the names undistorted and redistorted refer to the end result you want to deliver, not necessarily out of SynthEyes, but as a final deliverable of your VFX pipeline. The number in brackets next to each name refer to the number of filtering passes to be potentially applied to the image. The undistorted 1 workflow will expect you to have a single undistortion happening, while the redistorted 2 workflow consists of 2 filtering processes, one for the undistortion, one for the redistortion. So bear with me while I try to unclutter this. Let's run undistorted 1 and observe what is happening. The image and the overlying graphics are undistorted, but the image size is maintained, meaning that the very edge is cropped off. Let me reopen the lens workflow panel and select Undo Earlier Run to get back to our previous state. And let's zoom in really tight here on the door handle and once more run undistorted 1. Yep, that door handle is definitely being cropped off. A fair bit of warning. What you see is what you get. Even if you don't export any actual images out of SynthEyes and just want to use the data in another application, then this is what you will get, and in some cases it can be really cumbersome to recover those pixels, especially when you start handing off this data to other departments. So let's use Undo Earlier Run once more, and now let's check out what Redistorted 2 will give us. Aha! The image is undistorted once more, but this time we preserve all pixels by making the image format slightly larger and filling up the rest with black. If we check in on that door handle, it is still there in all its glory. Lastly, you might have wondered why I always use Undo Earlier Run instead of a simple undo. Simply put, a lens workflow script is a complex operation doing multiple things to your solved scene. The simple undo would simply miss things and potentially mess up your solve. Also, having this lens workflow specific undo allows you to undistort the image for a certain time, for example to align some geometry precisely, and then return to the lens workflow panel and undo the earlier run without you losing all the changes you did while your scene was undistorted. So when do you want to use this lens workflow? Well, if you're working on heavily distorted images, like from an action cam, it might actually be much less straining on the eye to work on the undistorted version. But apart from such extreme scenarios, I would leave the lens workflow alone until it comes to export. I will get into this in much more detail towards the end of this course, but just to tease it a little, the lens workflow is also integrated into the export module. So we can take advantage of SynthEyes distorting the graphics for us while we work on the shot and stay flexible with our lens workflow until the very end. To recap this little brain melter, the automatic lens distortion calculation requires a larger number of trackers, so this is ideal when you're feature tracking or have a lot of additional supervised trackers. Refining your solve can also refine your distortion values, so be mindful of that calculate distortion checkbox. Also be aware of the various lens distortion models SynthEyes ships with. Some might work better with third-party applications in your VFX pipeline than others. Last but not least, we explored the lens workflow script, which allows us to preview the lens distortion workflow we are choosing. So that was a whole lot of distorting and undistorting back and forth. Take a little breather from that, and when you're back, I will show you the two extremes, how we can use purpose-shot lens grids in SynthEyes, and how we can, if everything else fails, undistort our image manually. See you then.